So Jen is the state apiarist and in charge of the bees. But tonight she's going to be talking about wasps, misunderstood and very important, very important. Jen has a master's degree in entomology from the University of Maine and 20 years of experience, and she owns her own beehives as well as checking on everybody else's. So I'm going to let Jen take it away.
All right. Awesome. So if you have questions, I assume we use the chat, or I'm not sure. How does that work? Does anybody have any input?
What's your preference? Do you want the chat? Do you want people to just bust out with questions?
It doesn't matter one way or the other. I guess if we put them in chat, and then if you see any that come through, Hillary
Sure.
or Charlene, feel free
Sounds
to
great.
interrupt. Absolutely. Awesome. So as Charlene said, I am the state apiarist. So I work for the Department of Ag Conservation and Forestry in the Division of Animal and Plant Health. I work with bees. So obviously I am in plant health, not animal health, because bees are plants. That's not true, but I always think it's really interesting that that a lot of the entomologists work in plant health or in forestry, and not in animal health. But anyway, so I'm going to talk today about wasps. My background, I worked on a lot of different insects in my short lifetime, but my master's work was actually on a solitary wasp, Cerceris fumipennis, and I've always had a really kind of fascination with them. And I feel like most people, but I just feel like wasps are misunderstood and also really important. And so I hope to today kind of go through some of the neat wasps that we have here in Maine, some of their biology and their weird behavior, and maybe not so weird behavior, but also kind of talk about a little bit about their importance and why we should be concerned about their populations. So I'll bring us all the way back. Wasps, as most of you know, are in the order Hymenoptera. They're shared in there, or they're in that group with sawflies, ants, and bees. We have quite a few species around the world of them. And the characteristics of wasps, when we talked about them as kind of a general group, they tend to be slender with few hairs. They don't have a lot of hairs. They don't collect pollen in the same way that bees do. And so they do not require those hairs. They have a narrow petiole or waist. The females have a rigid ovipositor. Often this is modified for injecting venom, piercing, and or sawing in wood, also to lay eggs, but this is a rigid ovipositor in most cases. And then they have chewing, sucking mouth parts, which they use to build nests, when we talk about social wasps, and to eat and do their wasp stuff. So when we talk about wasps, I like to break them up into two groups, the predators and the parasitoids. Today, we're not going to cover anything about parasitoids besides this one slide. That's another whole talk in itself. I'm going to be talking about our predatory wasps mostly tonight. And these are ones that eat multiple prey during their lifetime. They generally kill their prey, and they subdue, kill, or paralyze that prey by stinging. Where parasitoids are free living, or they have free living adults that lay their eggs inside of a host. The egg hatches and the larvae consumes the host. It's not always inside the host. Sometimes it's outside the host, but then the larvae eats through the exoskeleton and consumes it, eventually killing it. They typically infect one host per life stage, and they're almost always smaller than the host. And so they're really neat and a really interesting group of wasps. And I encourage, if you ever want to learn about them, it'll blow your mind, the stuff that they do. So when we talk about predatory wasps, I also further like to break them down because, we're entomologists and we like to put things in little categories, lots and lots of categories. And so I like to break them apart into two groups based on their social behavior. So we have our social wasps and our solitary wasps. And social wasps, as the name indicates, typically have one queen or several queens in a colony, a couple of drones, which are the males, and a lot of sterile female workers. So if we think about something like a honeybee hive, or if we're talking about wasps, we think about bald-faced hornets, where they have a queen or two in a hive, and then they have all of these females, her daughters, that are working towards the upkeep of the hive. There's several generations in a nest at the same time. They have cooperation in caring for young that are not their own, so they're taking care of their sisters. And they build nests composed of chewed, dried plant material mixed with saliva and then regurgitated. Sometimes there's some mud mixed in there, but but most of the time it's primarily this dried plant material mixed with their saliva. And then our solitary wasps don't have that sort of social structure. So they don't have multiple individuals in a nest. Each female constructs and provisions her own nest. And these typically are found nesting in soil, rotted wood, pithy plant stems, or in nests made from mud. And so just to give you an idea of what a life cycle of these would look like. Oh, sorry, my clicker's a little bit slow. Social wasp life cycle. So this is a yellow jacket colony. And in the spring, a queen emerges. She's already mated the previous year. She emerges from where she overwintered. Typically it's in soil or the duff layer, someplace, or base of a tree, someplace secluded, and where she can just kind of stay out the winter. Then she emerges and she starts constructing a nest, usually with these chewed wood material. She lays her first couple eggs, provisions those, brings them food. And then once they hatch and her first daughters start, emerge as adults, I'm sorry, as soon as her daughters emerge as adults, she really just stays in the nest at that point and just is responsible for laying eggs. Her daughters take over all the other care, expanding the nest, feeding young, taking care of all the wasp duties. In the late summer, fall, drones are produced. And in this system, this is a haploid diploid system. So drones have half the chromosomes of females. There's a lot of jokes that can be made about that. You choose whichever one you want and giggle to yourself about it. But that's sexual determination sex is determined by the number of chromosomes the individual has. So males have one set of chromosomes, the females have two. So haploid diploid system. So in the late summer, fall, drones are produced. So those are a bunch of unfertilized eggs that are laid. And then also queens are produced. They go out, they leave the nest, they mate, and then the new queens produced, the new mated queens will find a spot to overwinter, again, in that soil or at the base of a tree, someplace safe and sheltered. And after the first frost, that original colony and its queen all die. So they're one season life cycle. Our solitary wasps are similar, except for that they don't have this big nest to take care of. A female will emerge sometime during the season. So some of our solitary wasps come out relatively early in the season. Others will emerge July, August. It's just variable. It depends on the type of wasp. And the adults are typically around for 4 to 6 weeks. So this example right here, this is Cercis fumipennis, the wasp that I did my master's thesis on. And the female emerges mid-July to September. She provisions her nests with paralyzed beetles. In this case, it's in the family Buprestidae. And she stings them with her stinger, which paralyzes them. Then she digs a nest underground, lays an egg on it. That egg hatches and then consumes the still living paralyzed beetles as a food source, which I just think is so morbid and amazing. And then that larvae, once it grows to a certain size, it pupates and it overwinters. And then again, the female emerges early July. The next year, a different female. So we're going to kind of talk about these two groups separately. We're going to start with solitary wasps, mostly because the vast majority of wasp species are solitary. I know it's the same with bees. All of the bees that are social, like bumblebees and honeybees, those are the ones that people know the most about. And it goes the same with our wasps. If you think about, ask kind of your normal human being what wasps they know, they're going to say something like bald-faced hornets or yellow jackets. So they're going to be talking mostly about these social wasps, but the vast majority are actually solitary. They are ephemeral. They only are out and about for a couple weeks every year, and they are less likely to sting. So when we think about wasps, one of the main concerns that most people have is that they're stinging. Our social wasps, absolutely, they can be defensive. They are protecting a huge amount of resources, including their young, and sisters and family members in that hive. So it pays for them to be defensive. But when we talk about our solitary wasps, a lot of times they're really reluctant to sting. They don't have a nest to protect. So they're less likely to be defensive. Often when people do get stung by them, it's accidentally. So they're stepped on, trapped in clothing, or being carelessly handled. That's when you're more likely to get stung by them. So we're going to talk about a bunch of different groups, and everything from specids to crabrionids, pompilids, and we're going to cover quite a bit. But I guess one of my very favorite wasps, we're going to start with that one, is the great golden digger wasp. And this is a specid wasp. It's found throughout North America. It's one of our larger ones. It's not super big, but it's super noticeable. It's about 1 inch long, and it has these beautiful like golden hairs and these reddish orange legs. And its abdomen is kind of 2-colored. So it's got that reddish orange top of it, and then the base, or I guess, yeah, the end of it is that blackish color, and they have dusky wings. They hunt crickets, grasshoppers, and katydids. The adults feed on nectar, and they're usually out and about late June into August. And what they do is they have this, and I'm showing you kind of the nest structure here, because a lot of the solitary wasps have similar nest structures where they have a main tunnel, and then they have offshoots of it that they put their larvae and the prey items in, off of that tunnel. And the way that she makes this, the wasp makes this, is that she cuts the earth with her mandibles, and then she kind of, just like a dog, uses her hind legs to kind of spray that dirt out and digs this tunnel. And she's constantly moving soil out and kind of flushing it out with her legs. And she can make half a dozen different nests and multiple cells per nest. So she does this, half a dozen times, 6 to 8 times. And she typically will put 1 to 6 prey per cell. And these nests can be up to 6 inches deep. So if you can imagine a small wasp, 1 inch long wasp, digging out that much material, it's going to take some time and effort. The one really neat thing about this insect is that they have this genetically patterned behavior. So the wasp is very particular. And what she does is she goes out, she finds a katydid, and she stings it, which paralyzes it. Then she brings it back to the opening of her tunnel, and she places it with the head facing the tunnel. She then goes down into the tunnel, makes sure everything is where it needs to be, make sure nothing has happened. And then she goes back out, grabs the katydid by its antenna, and pulls it down into the tunnel, and whatever cell she wants it to be in, lays her egg, does that whole thing. If you move that katydid after she's dropped it off and brought it down and gone down to go make sure everything was okay in her nest, if you move it, turn it around, move it a little bit of distance away from the opening, she will go out, find it, pull it back to the right position, then go back down and check it, then come back out and take it by the antenna and bring it down. So if you really want to mess with these sort of wasps, if you just move their prey over and over, they will keep repeating the same pattern over and over until they get it all the way through. So they have to do each step before they can move on to the next one. And they have to do them in sequence. It's just really neat and very kind of OCD. So their sister species is the great black wasp, very similar in shape, just different coloration. This one gets a slightly bit bigger, maybe a little less than 1.5 inches, black body, smoky wings. And this also the adults hunt crickets, grasshoppers, and katydids, and they sting their prey 3 times, once in the neck and twice in the thorax. It's thought that they do it in those places to kind of put their venom into near where the muscles are for wings, and then also where the head muscles are. And the adults feed on nectar, and they're usually found July through September out and about. And they each cell houses a single larvae, which can consume 2 to 6 prey. It just depends on how large the prey items are and what that larvae is destined to be. So typically in most wasps, female larvae are fed more than male larvae, simply because females are larger and they have to, produce later on in their lives eggs and things like that. And a single one of these wasps can capture 16 grasshoppers per day. So that can put quite a bit of dent in your local grasshopper population. Unfortunately, because they are so good at finding prey, and they do a similar behavior where they will leave the prey near the entrance of the hole, birds have learned this, and birds will often come in and steal somewhere up to 40% of their prey. So 16, they lose about 40% of that to bird predation. And one of my other favorites, actually, I'm going to say this about every wasp. Every wasp is my favorite. I guess I'm an equal opportunity wasp lover. So our cicada killers. We have 21 species worldwide. There are 4 found in the US, or I guess in North America. And the only one that we really see in the Northeast is this one, the eastern cicada killer. This is probably our largest native wasp in the Northeast. It's up to 2 inches long. They could be relatively scary if you don't know what they are. They have a red and black thorax and black to reddish brown marks. Their abdomen is marked with black to reddish marks and light yellow stripes that don't go typically all the way around the abdomen. There's a kind of they don't come together at the top of the insect, and the wings are kind of a brownish orange. So in a lot of cases, this wasp, even though it's very large, cicadas can be twice their weight. And so these wasps, they go out, they find a cicada, they paralyze it, and then they have to fly something that is almost twice their weight back to their nest. So they can be pretty intimidated or intimidating to people when you see one of these big, huge insects carrying another large insect flying towards you. The males in this case could be slightly territorial, and they can often be seen, they emerge a little bit before the females, and they can be seen fighting for kind of territory or prime mating spots. So if a lot of, as they emerge, they'll kind of fight other males in the area to get first dibs on any females that emerge as they're emerging. And they're found in Maine early July to late August, sometimes into early September, but that's unusual. It's usually just to late August. And they love the well-drained, light textured soils and full sunlight. And they are large, and they move a lot of soil for their nest. Their nest could be up to 20 inches deep with 10 to 15 cells off of a main tunnel. And they can move up to 100 cubic inches of soil for their nest, which is pretty remarkable for for an insect. The male eggs usually are provisioned with 1 cicada, female eggs 2 to 3, and that's really common in wasps, especially solitary wasps, where they provision differently based on the gender or the sex of the potential larvae. So we have up to 40% of the larvae emerge as adults the following year, which is a pretty high rate. And they do control cicada populations in an area, which benefits deciduous trees. Most of you know cicadas spend a year or 2, up to 17, depending on the species, underground feeding on the roots of trees. And so these cicada killers can actually put a little bit of a dent in their population and help protect those. And they can be problematic, and they can be a pest. They do, because they like that well-drained, light textured soils in full sunlight. That typically is where people have paving stones, kind of the sides of driveways, front lawns, paths leading up to the house. That's that sort of soil. And so they really will nest in those areas. And then if they're nesting there, sometimes you get skunks that come to the area looking for the larvae and dig them all up. And that can even cause more damage. So
Can I pop in?
Oh, yeah.
Some questions here. Sorry. Were you done with that? Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So, Kathy asks, do you know if the male solitary wasps have a significantly shorter lifespan than the females?
They typically do. They're around for like a week or two, where the female wasps can, especially, so I can talk specifically for Cercis fumipennis. We see those 4 to 6 weeks. And then the male wasps are around 1 to 2 weeks at most.
Great. I have some longer questions here. Do you want to do those now or at the end?
Yeah, either way, it doesn't matter. Sorry, I'm going through. So
sure.
There's so some of our, so there's a question here about solitary wasps only pass down one set of chromosomes. So for male eggs, yes. So our male eggs, so if they want to produce a male, they don't fertilize that egg and that becomes a male. If they want to produce a female, they open up the valve. I guess that's a loose way of saying it, but they release eggs or sperm from their spermatheca and then fertilize that egg and it becomes a female. So, yep.
Awesome. Thanks, Jen.
And then sting potency. Oh, I have no idea, but I am going to talk about one of our most venomous or most painful stinger. So there's a question about stinging potency. Great. Awesome. All right. Yep. And if I missed any, I'll answer some more in a bit. All right. So Eastern cicada killer, one of my favorite. So we're going to move on to bee wolves, and just like what their name is, they really focus on bees as their prey source that they feed their young. They're found, bee wolves, there's a lot of different species, and they're found in the United States, Europe, and Northern Africa. Some are specialists, others are generalists. Typically, they are provisioning with 1 to 5 bees per cell. And the way that they find the bees is they go and hang out at flowers. It seems like a great idea. That's where bees are going to be. And when they see a bee land on a flower, they actually pounce on it. Then they sting the prey in the membranous areas under the bee, which paralyzes the voluntary muscles. Those are the muscles that are what do you call it? Moving its wings, legs, things like that. And the way that the bee wolf actually presents itself, it grabs the bee, it presents the most armored part of its body so it doesn't get stung in response. You can imagine if you are attacking something that also stings, that you don't want to get stung. So the way that they actually jump on the bee, they show them the areas that could potentially be stung by that bee when they're handling it are the well or armored portions. Males will mark twigs and other objects with pheromones to claim territory. So you can get a male bee wolf that will kind of claim a territory over potential nesting sites, waiting for females to come into it or emerge from the previous year. And the adults do consume some nectar while they're hanging out at flowers. We also have spider wasps. These are the pompilids, which are they're kind of a various species within that group, but the family is Pompilidae. And there are over 300 species in North America. The oldest fossil record of them are from 54 to 48 million years ago from the Klondike Mountain Formation in Washington State. And they could get rather large, 2 inches. That's probably for some of the more southern species. Up here, maybe about a half an inch to just under an inch, maybe an inch at the most. And they're all metallic blue or black, long spiny legs that reach past the abdomen. You can see that in the bottom left-hand picture. And their wings are smoky to yellow, and they are really they have a really characteristic movement pattern. So because they're often hunting spiders, they're going to be in places where you find spiders, and spiders are found on the ground, on flowers, looking for their own prey. And what the wasp will do, it'll actually land on the ground and it starts kind of scurrying slightly, and it flicks its wings a lot. So it's constantly flicking its wings as it's scurrying along the ground, looking for those spiders. And they really focus on free living spiders. So tarantulas, wolf spiders, huntsman spiders, jumping spiders, baboon spiders, spiders that typically are not necessarily finding their prey through webs, but finding them by hunting. And if a wasp catches a spider that is maybe a little bit too big for it to fly off with, they'll actually clip the legs of the spider off to make it lighter. The spider can still live without its 8 legs, and so they're not damaging the larvae's food source doing that. So some of them construct their own nests before they capture a spider. So some are preppers and some are panickers. The others capture a spider first, and then they're like, oh shoot, now I need a home. And then they'll stash it somewhere, build a nest, and then come back and collect it. And some will dig burrows into the ground, some build mud cells in rock walls. Some use pre-existing holes in trees, old mouse burrows, and some will actually use the spider's nest itself as a nesting site. So they'll drag the spider back down in, lay an egg on it, and then they will use that. And typically they use a single prey per larvae, where larger prey items, so larger spiders, are destined for female eggs. So the larger prey produce female wasps. And then the egg is laid on the abdomen of the spider. And the wasp does that. And you can see that in this bottom picture, that wasp is actually starting to lay an egg on the abdomen of that spider. And they do that so that when the larvae starts feeding on it, it feeds on the abdomen and it works its way up. And the last thing that it eats is the heart and the central nervous system. So that spider stays alive as long as possible. One thing about these wasps, the solitary wasp especially, is they want fresh prey for their young. And so that's why they sting and paralyze these things instead of stinging and killing them, because the moment that insects die, especially if you're putting them underground or someplace else, bacteria starts growing, and then that could spoil the food for their larvae. So they want to paralyze them, keep them fresh. And then the way that in this case the larvae are placed on them, it causes them to start from the bottom up and then consume the things that are actually going to kill it last, kill that prey item last. Neat, right? Ugh, it's so weird and lovely. So let's see, next one. Oh, so the most famous pompilid that we have, and we don't have this in Maine, of course, because we don't really have many tarantulas running around. Maybe some of you have them. Oh, I don't know if they're legal in Maine. I used to have them when I lived in New York. I used to have pet tarantulas, but we have a wasp. It's called the tarantula hawk, and it's very large. You can see that picture in the middle. They're really large. They're really large insects, and they're kind of sneaky. So they have this really interesting predatory behavior where they wait for a tarantula to get away from its burrow far enough away so it can't scurry back in, and then they hover over it and flap their wings slowly. And that wind over the tarantula mimics a bird, how a bird would maybe drop down on it and prey on it. And the tarantula, because birds, they have a lot of their prey drive is based on movement. The tarantula, they curl up and stop moving, and that's perfect for a tarantula hawk. What it does is it lands on it and then it stings it and paralyzes it. And they usually sometimes they make their own nests and they'll construct their own. Other times they'll actually just take the paralyzed tarantula, drag it back down into its burrow and lay its egg on it and let it consume that tarantula down there. Now this one, we have this index in entomology. It's the sting pain index. This guy, he went out and he just likes getting stung by stuff. And they have a scale of 0 to 4, with 4 being intense pain. And tarantula hawks are 4. And the way it was described is blinding, fierce, and shockingly electric. A running hairdryer has been dropped into your bubble bath. So I don't know about you, but I never ever want to get stung by one of these. It sounds terrible, but they are really cool insects. I had a call from a friend of mine in Arizona one time, and she sent me this video and she's like, I saw a tarantula flying through the air. And I was like, there's tarantulas don't fly. And she's like, I saw it. And she sent me a picture, and it was actually a tarantula hawk carrying a tarantula, flying through the air. And she thought it was just a tarantula with wings. But they're really remarkable. So
Couple questions real quick.
yeah, absolutely.
So just related to the last one, why do you think the spider wasps flick their wings as they move?
What was that?
Why do you think that the spider wasps flick their wings as they move?
I don't know for sure, but I would suspect that it's a way of, it's probably very similar to the tarantula hawk, where it's kind of moving air, which then causes a behavior in the tarantula to stop moving. And it could be something similar, like if they're moving air, it might flush out spiders for them to catch, or prey items, or it could actually cause, if they see one, maybe that's why they're flicking their wings, and it causes them to kind of stop moving because they think that there's a prey item coming, a predator coming towards them. It could be something like that. But yeah, they flick their wings. It's a really interesting behavior. I don't exactly know why, but that's what I suspect. It has something to do with their hunting.
Sure. The other question related to that is, do you know if they control the dosage of venom based on the size of the prey, assuming a larger dose would kill a smaller spider?
I actually don't know. I don't know the answer to that. No, I don't know. That's a really great question. Is that Eric?
Mm-hmm.
Eric. Eric, if you want to shoot me an email, I can actually figure that out. I could do a little dive into the research. That's a new question for me. Nobody's ever asked it. But yeah. Yep. Yeah. So shoot me an email and I can get you the answer to that if you don't mind.
Awesome.
Good question. All right. Any other ones?
No, I'm not
Okay.
really pertinent to this.
Okay, great. And then the last little group here is the mud daubers. And mud daubers is kind of a general, it always becomes a little tricky when we have a common name for a group, especially when it spans two families that also have, in this case, wasps that are completely different. So mud daubers fall into two families, Specidae and Crabrionidae. And anybody who knows the back history of these families, we're kind of constantly moving insects in and out of them in the two families back and forth. So it always gets a little confusing here, but mud daubers are variable, as you can guess, because they cover quite a few species in two different families, around an inch long, not super big. Most are slender. The nests are made of mud molded by the wasp mandibles. Wasps will actually go out and collect mud and bring it back to their nesting site, and then mold that with their mandibles and dry, like kind of let it dry. And they may occupy the same site year after year, often alongside other species of insects. So if there's a site that's good for one type of mud dauber, often you'll find other ones close by. It means that there's a good mud source close, and that there's a good nesting site that's sheltered, that has the right kind of lighting and conditions, and is protected. So often you'll find multiple mud dauber species nesting in the same area. And the adults feed on nectar. They stock their nests with spiders, so they are spider hunters as well. Usually their species are type specific, and they usually have more than one per cell. So remember the pompilids, the spider wasps, they typically are one spider per larvae or egg. And in this case, these ones will often do more than one per cell, per larvae, per egg. And sometimes you can actually tell or kind of start to identify, narrow it down, what species of wasp it is by what spiders you find in the nest. Some are really species specific and only hunt a couple different individual species of spiders. They're less fecund than some of the other solitary wasps, mostly because they have the offspring are concentrated in one place and highly vulnerable to predators and parasitoids. You'll see in a couple pictures like the pipe organ mud daubers, and you have a lot of larvae, and they're really easy to access for a predator or parasitoid. And then the other thing is if you have a plane and you don't use it all that often, I know most of you are just jet setting around in your private planes, but if you have a plane that you don't use all that often, I always suggest that to check the engines for mud dauber nests. They have been implicated in a couple really impressive airplane incidents and crashes. If your jet is left too long, mud daubers love that area inside of an engine or inside the engines underneath the wings, and those can, of course, can become dislodged and then cause an engine malfunction in a jet. So who would have thought? We know geese do it, but also mud daubers. So this one is one that I was talking about. If you can notice these tubes, you can see just that there's one in this. Oh, sorry, I'm pointing at my screen. You can't see that. Hopefully you can see the pointer. On the left side of this middle picture, you can see that the larvae are just, or here in this case, pupa, are just stacked one after another in these long tubes. And so a predator, a bird finding this sort of thing, that's a Borgitschmorg. They're just gonna, break that apart and eat each one of those pupa and just have a delicious meal. So that's one of the reasons why they are kind of less fecund, is just because they have so many predators and parasitoids. So the pipe orchid mud dauber, they're a shiny black, bluish spider. You can see here, this one is holding up in the top corner, is holding sorry, I'm having a little issue here with my thing. Let me see if I can get rid of this. There we go. It has a little spider that is collected. And they typically will put between 3 and 18 spiders per cell. Again, it depends on the size of the spider. They'll put more if they're smaller spiders to make up for the weight. And the wasps will begin building a nest within 48 hours of emerging. So the female will emerge, mate, and then start building her nest within 48 hours of that from emerging. And she makes 5 to 6 pipes in a cluster. The pipes have multiple cells and they're built side by side or on top of each other. If they're layered on top of each other, they have lower survivability. So if they're if they stack, 3 tubes and then another 3 right on top, the ones that are in the bottom have to emerge out of the top and can damage the top. So this bottom picture here in the middle is, these are all emergence holes, where wasps, are those the wasp holes? Yeah, those are the wasp holes. And so if they're side by side, there's less damage to the ones above. And then the ones from below can struggle to get out through the ones above, and that can also reduce their likelihood of survival. And males will actually, this is a case of male parental care, which is kind of unique in insects. It happens, but it's not super common. The males will actually defend will defend the nest when the female is out collecting food to provision the nest. So we do have some male kind of parental care in guarding. So whether the male is defending the young or defending his female, that's to be debated, but at least there is some male protection there. We have the black and yellow mud dauber. This one is up to 1 inch long. Again, up here, I usually see these just about 1 inch, not much more. They're black and yellow, as their name kind of describes. Their wings are dusky. They build nests in shaded, sheltered areas, so rock walls, cliffs, bridges, barns, garages, open air porches, eaves. And their nests are usually 25 cells covered in smooth layer of mud. You can see that in this bottom picture. And they'll provision 6 to 15 spiders per cell. Now, the adults feed on nectar, and they especially like things in the carrots kind of group, Queen Anne's lace, parsnips, water parsnips, or I guess the parsnip group. And they nest may be aggressively defended, but they rarely sting. So if you go and start disturbing one of these, the female wasp will start buzzing you in the face, but she's really not probably going to sting you. She'll warn you off, and she may even like bang into your forehead a couple of times, but it's unusual for them to sting. And you can see this mud collecting right here in this middle picture. You can see this female has a little ball of mud that she's going to carry back to where her nesting site is, and then use that to make her mud nest. We have the blue mud wasp. And this one is it's a really beautiful wasp, and they feed on the widow spiders, which is pretty neat. And they capture the spiders by luring them out of their place of protection and grabbing them from the web. So what they do is they go to the corner of the web or the side of the web, and they kind of like tickle it, and the spider will come out to take a look at it, and they'll kind of lure them out further and further, and then pounce on them and stab them, paralyze them, and then use them as food. So they kind of lure them out. And this one is pretty neat because what it does not produce its own nests from scratch. It steals black and yellow mud dauber nests. So this species here, it goes back through, finds a black and yellow mud dauber nest, and it uses water to soften the nest, soften that mud. It'll take out the spiders and the larvae and the eggs that the yellow and black mud dauber put in there, and then it'll stick their own spiders in there and their own eggs. Pretty neat. So it's kind of usurping this other species. And they're a pollinator of some common wildflowers. So, any questions before we move on to social wasps?
There are some questions and discussions just about, try to stick right now just to what you're presenting about. Do you know if the blue mud wasp's hunting strategy is instinctual or learned? Some species of jumping spiders, which do something similar to prey on other spiders, have to learn what patterns will. Oh, okay. So the jumping spiders have to learn. She or he is curious if the blue mud dauber's hunting strategy is instinctual or learned.
Oh, that's a good question. So I don't know. I mean, I would assume that there is a certain amount of learning, as a lot of our kind of wasps and bees, even with accessing. So if we think about honeybees or bumblebees, any bees really, they go out and they find flowers to forage on and collect nectar and pollen from. So when they're younger foragers, when they're just new foragers, they go out and they typically forage on really easy to access plants or flowers. So ones that have open petals that are really easy to access. And so I would assume that there probably is a bit of a learning curve over the lifespan of a wasp as well, where maybe at the beginning, the easier to collect prey is what they focus on, and then they kind of get more advanced, they get more advanced prey going on. I don't know that for sure, but we do see it in a lot of other kind of our wasps and honeybees. Of course, that's in social insects, so they do have multiple generations, so they are also able to learn kind of watching other bees. So maybe that doesn't happen with solitary wasps. So I don't know, I just talked myself in a circle. I don't know the answer to that one, whether there's a learning aspect to it or they just know how to do it.
Awesome.
So there's a lot of unknowns tonight. Okay, so social wasps, family Vespidae. So we're going to cover the yellow jackets, the Polistes, and the true hornets, the Vespa. So again, the social life cycle, we talked about this. It's one kind of generation a year, or one nest cycle a year, one colony cycle a year. So the yellow jackets are kind of cover two different genera. So it's family Vespidae, the Vespula and Dolichovespula species, and most are black with yellow and white markings. Some are red with yellow and white markings. We don't see very many of the kind of red with yellow and white up here. It's almost primarily black with yellow and white. And they make their nests from chewed wood fiber mixed with saliva. And you can see this nest structure here. They start with an envelope. This is a ground nesting species. So they start with an envelope on the outside that expands down as they build comb, and they build more kind of comb or and this is where their brood is. So this is where their babies are formed, and they expand that down as the season goes on. And then they have a little opening at the bottom. So when they want to leave, they go out the bottom, outside the envelope, and then out of the entrance. So in general, the Dolichovespula species create aerial nests. So those are above ground nests. And in general, the Vespula species build underground nests. Now, it's not 100% of the time. If a wasp, a female queen, she finds a suitable nesting spot and it happens to be a burrow below ground and she's an aerial nesting species, she may take advantage of that. But typically Dolichovespula are aerial and Vespula are underground nesters. They rarely reuse a nesting spot. If there is a large underground area and yellow jackets use that one year, they may use the same entrance, but actually build a nest next to the original one or on the other side of this underground cave, but they will not reuse the same nesting material. And in a very large colony, ours do not get this big. You can have up to 500 workers and 15,000 cells. Ours typically are not in that range up here in the Northeast. The larvae are fed masticated protein, primarily insects, but also carrion and fish, if they can find it. And the larvae secrete a sugary substance for workers. So one of the things about yellow jackets is that they don't really do a lot of foraging for nectar. Nectar is primarily carbohydrates, and that's used for energy to move. So they use that for species that do feed on nectar. They use that as their kind of energy for moving their muscles, for flying, for foraging for other food, that sort of thing. In this case, the larvae actually secrete a sugary substance that provides energy for the adults, for the workers. So most do not visit flowers until later in the season as the larvae population declines and the population of the adults increases. So once there's too many adult mouths to feed in relation to the larvae that is producing this sugary substance, then you will start seeing them on kind of high energy source food. And they have a smooth stinger with small barbs. They do not get ripped out when they sting. So typically a single individual will sting you multiple times, which is super fun. And the weather in the spring is one of the most important factors for the colony establishment. If we have a cool, wet spring, that does not bode well for yellow jacket nest initiation. And so just a couple species up here in the Northeast, we have the eastern yellow jacket. It's under an inch long, about a little over a half an inch long, yellow with black markings. Their nests can be hundreds to maybe 1,000 workers, typically underground because they're one of the Vespula species, and usually shallow, less than 10 inches deep. Their colonies peak in August and September. And the foraging workers are capable of olfactory learning. So if they find a food source that maybe wouldn't be a traditional food source and they get a reward from it, they can actually learn to recognize that going forward. So they can do some olfactory learning. Their nests, these wasps also have a relationship with two different types of flies. And what these flies do is they actually lay their eggs. The flies go into the entrance of the nest. They lay their eggs on the envelope. And then when those eggs hatch, they fall down to the opening underneath the nest where a lot of the waste debris from inside the nest falls. Those flies feed on it and they kind of keep it from building up. So they're almost like the kind of the garbage guys of the nest. They are eating that waste material so it doesn't build up and block that entrance and then penetrate into the envelope. They find a lot of their prey from insect pests on cultivated and ornamental plants. So things like cabbage loopers and grasshoppers, pretty much anything that moves, they will try to collect it and eat it. In the bottom here, even European honeybees, so even the Western honeybee here, this wasp is preying on that and it's going to chew this up and bring it back to its nest to feed its babies or feed its sisters. The food source, they also, eastern yellow jacket is an important food source for vertebrate predators, black bears, skunks, birds, because they are underground nesters. Anything that can dig underground can dig up one of these. So often in the fall, when this colony is kind of on death's door, you'll find them getting dug up by black bears and skunks as a last minute food source before those animals start going into kind of their winter time hibernation. They can be defensive. If anybody's ever gotten into yellow jacket nests, you know that they can sting, and they have an alarm pheromone that's released from their stinger that will call in reinforcements. So once they sting you, you'll probably get stung by multiples as they are following that alarm pheromone. We have a German yellow jacket that is now widespread. It was first found in New York in 1891. And they think that this is moved faster than it normally would by just normal kind of wasp migration due to humans and by movement of hibernating queens. So again, our hibernating queens, what they're doing is they are living in the soil or at the base of plants, someplace that's safe, secluded, semi-warm, or I guess protected from the harshest part of the winter. And when people dig up plants, they will sometimes also get those queens in there, move them to someplace else, and they emerge in the fall, in the next following spring, and then we get a kind of a jump in that movement. In some places, they are out competing our eastern yellow jacket, so they are kind of transplanting them, and they're becoming the dominant species, so that's a problem. We also have aerial yellow jackets, Dolicha vespula, and they look a lot like German yellow jackets, but typically their nests are above ground, occasionally subterranean, but mostly above ground. And birds and other wasps can be predators of them. And one interesting thing about them is they actually have a little bit of control over spraying venom. Some of the other wasp species do this as well, where they can contract their venom reservoir muscles and actually give a little spray of venom out if they need to. So that can deter smaller predators. And you can see sometimes these are really difficult to identify. So we have the aerial, the eastern, and the German yellow jackets here side by side. They have very similar markings. They're slightly different. So this is another whole area of and then there's variations within species as well, which is super challenging. So a lot of times if somebody sends me a picture of a yellow jacket, I'm like, you got to get really close on that abdomen, and maybe you could send me a specimen and I can ID it, but it's hard from just photographs. And then sometimes you actually can get one species that's trying to usurp the other. So in this case, we have the aerial yellow jacket, and then another species that's trying to usurp it, another queen. So we have two queens trying to take over this same nest. And then we have bald-faced hornets. So this is not a true hornet. They're found throughout the US. They're actually Dolicha vespula, so they're a type of yellow jacket. They just have the name bald-faced hornet, but they're not a hornet. They have the 3 white stripes on the abdomen, the white and black markings on their face. They have a large nest that is averages about 14 by 23 inches long. And they can get up to a couple hundred workers, and they can nest anywhere from 1 foot to 65 feet. So they can be all the way up near the tops of trees. And they have some really interesting kind of colony drama that happens. So because they're haploid diploid, which we talked a little bit about earlier, the workers are most related to their sons. So in reality, natural selection would favor workers laying unfertilized eggs. So sneaky workers laying their own eggs, they're passing on 100% of their genes, whereas they're only related 50% to their mom, and maybe at most, the females only, the queens in this case, only mate with one male, so they're about 75% related to their sisters, and so they're most related to their own sons. So those sneaky females, workers will lay unfertilized eggs. They still can lay eggs, they've never mated, so they don't have sperm, so they can't fertilize their eggs. And so they actually did this study where they found up to 25% of the males produced in a colony are actually produced by workers, which is really interesting. But it even becomes a little more nefarious because after the workers and queen destined eggs, the queen has produced the next year's queens, because again, remember, the workers cannot lay fertilized eggs, so they cannot produce queens. They cannot do that. So after that's done, the workers will kind of upset the hive. They'll kill the queen so that they can produce a bunch of sons to potentially mate with those queens that are being produced. So neat, right? So they actually will kill the queen when it's later on in the season, so maybe they can get more of their own 100% genetically identical males down.
Needs a movie adaptation.
It does. It's so I mean, it's so drama. It's like the real housewives of the bald-faced hornet nest. I don't know. I just love it. And they can be territorial. So one of the things that people do is they leave up the old nest. So if you have a bald-faced hornet nest, leave it up, or yellow jacket nest. And often you'll find that a new hornet the following year will not make a nest where there's already one there. And so you can make these fake ones. So all of you crocheting or knitting right now, watching this, this is a new side hustle for you, creating fake hornet nests or bald-faced hornet nests. And then another group that's near and dear to my heart are the Polistes or umbrella wasps. Oh gosh, what am I doing for time? See whether I need to speed this up. Oh God, I got about 10 more minutes, so it would be a little over. So these are the largest genus, but within Vespidae, the Polistes species. There's over 300 of them, and they're very variable in color. We get all different kind of color combinations, but they have this characteristic, like long and slender. We call it a lazy flight, with their long legs dangling. They don't ever seem to be in much of a hurry. They're just kind of loping around in the air, doing their Polistes sort of thing. And they make these nests that are open-faced, often oriented down, and they're held on to the surface where they make the nest by a single strand, a single filament. You can see in this middle left-hand picture right here, that single filament in the open-faced. And they are commonly in protected areas. They don't seem to mind much being around humans, so they're in areas where people walk all the time. They don't seem to worry about that. They primarily feed on caterpillars, and they are often founded by a single or several related females. And the recognition, so it's not a genetic recognition of your sister. So two sisters will sometimes form a nest together, and it's not genetic. What it is actually it's a scent. So they can scent that if you smell like me, we came from the same nest. So that's how they tell each other apart, is actually by scent, not by genetics. So they did a series of experiments where they transplanted eggs from different females from different mothers into different nests, and they recognized the scent of their nest, not the genetics. So it was neat. And they retain dominance. So if you have two females that are founding a nest, one of them is going to want to lay eggs, or they're going to fight on who's going to lay eggs. And so one of them becomes the dominant and one of them becomes the submissive. And the dominance is held through violence. So if the submissive tries to lay eggs, the dominant female will bite them, push them off the nest. They can also be vibrations, and this is kind of acts maybe as a warning system, where if they're vibrating, it's almost like a low growl from a dog. It's like, you better back off. Don't be laying eggs. I'm in charge here. And then also stroking. So they'll go over and they'll kind of push on the face of the wasp that's trying their subordinate and kind of stroke them and get them off the target of laying an egg. And then some try to usurp established nests and can become kind of aggressive towards each other. But again, these are really rare to sting. They do have a lot of disadvantages, more so than some of our other social wasps. Having an open nest, that's really just asking for lots of predators and parasitoids. So we have flies and mantid-flies and lepidopterans and all kinds of different things that get into these Polistes nests. Up here, this picture, I just love this these two insects together. So these are actually strepsipterans. So these little black dots or black globs that are underneath the abdominal segments. These are polistes, which is these are strepsipterans, which are a type of parasite, the twisted wing parasite, which is really neat. There's parasitic wasps, and then there's other polistes that take over the nests of other species of polistes. So there's lots of different things that are going after these nests. We have two that I'm going to talk about, the northern paper wasp here, which is our native species. Up here, there's several different color morphs. In the Northeast, we get this kind of one here with the brown, black bodies, and then the smallish yellow bands and two reddish marks on the abdomen. And you can tell which one's dominant. So if it's founded by two sister wasps, you can tell which one's dominant by who's standing on the very top of the nest. So it's like king of the hill. Whoever's up here is the dominant one. We have this other species, European paper wasp, that was brought in accidentally in 1970s and is quickly spread throughout the United States. And this one outcompetes the northern paper wasp. There's actually areas that we don't find that northern paper wasp anymore. It's been totally extirpated from the area by these European paper wasps. And they can outcompete because they eat different types of insects, not just caterpillars. So that expands their food resources. They nest in areas with better protection, which helps them avoid predation that affects other Polistes species. They're more productive. They produce workers a week earlier under the same climatic conditions and then forage earlier in the day than our northern paper wasp, the native species. They also are black and yellow, which we know is defensive colors, or watch out, I'm poisonous, or I'm toxic, or I'm going to sting your face off colors. And so birds, of course, know and recognize that, so that makes them less likely to be preyed on. And then their comb is stronger attached. That filament is stronger. And so predators and weather can't dislodge it as easy. So they're out competing our native species, which is unfortunate. And then finally, the two true hornets that we have in North America. We have two species. Neither is actually native. So we have European hornet, which is probably one of the prettiest, I guess, of the wasps. They have this kind of red head, some red on their bodies, and then these yellow and black markings on their abdomen. And it's been in the United States since the 1800s. It's relatively long, about 1.5 inches long. Really a neat one. They typically hunt larger insects, but can feed on a variety of things. They make paper nests, typically in hollow trees. So you can see this bottom picture. That's the entrance to a nest here. They tend to be relatively docile. If you stick your hand in there and start waving around in their nest, you're probably going to get stung. But if you're just walking by, they're less likely to sting you. They don't have the same. So with yellow jackets, especially bald-faced hornets, they have a radius from their nest. So if you get within that radius of their nest entrance, you will get stung. Where in the case of the European hornet, you can be pretty much right on top of it. As long as you're not actively damaging their nest, they'll usually leave you alone. We don't see these in Maine very often. Occasionally, very, very rarely, maybe in very southern Maine, York County, but they're not super common. They're more common in kind of the Carolinas and Pennsylvania into parts of New York. And then the northern giant hornet. So the murder hornet, or the Asian giant hornet, what it used to be called. This is the other true hornet that we have in the country, not native. It's been introduced into the Northwest, so in the Washington State area and British Columbia area. It's the world's largest hornet. It gets up to 2 inches long, 3 inches wide. It has a really pretty yellow-orange head and a yellow-orange tip on the abdomen, and then stripes. It's almost exclusively subterranean, of course. In Washington, one of the most publicized nest removals was actually in a tree, which is interesting, but their nest can be up to 24 inches deep with entrances that are very small, up to 24 inches wide. So they can defend that sort of entrance. And the reason why we're a little concerned about them is that they do hunt medium to large size insects, and social bees is one of their favorites, social bees and wasps. And they can kill a Western honeybee colony, so a European honeybee colony, They do this by sending out a scout. The scout goes to the nest entrance, and then once it finds a hive, it'll release a scent, which calls in other wasps. Those hornets can kill as many as 40 bees per minute. So under 50 hornets can kill a colony in just a few hours. And what the northern giant hornet does is it stings, rips apart these bees, and then drinks the juices for energy, and then chews the bees into a paste, which they then bring back to the nest and feed to their larvae. Now, in its native area, the northern giant hornet co-lives with Japanese honeybees, so they're both in the same area. And the Japanese honeybees are not as susceptible as our European honeybees are, or our Western honeybees. And the reason is because those bees have co-evolved alongside this predator, and bees can detect the pheromones. And when they detect the pheromone of a wasp, what they do is they send about 100 bees to the entrance, and they set a trap, and they wait for a wasp to enter, or the hornet to enter. Once the hornet enters, the bees all jump on top of it, and then they vibrate their wing muscles, they flutter their wings, and they heat up to about 115 degrees, and they increase the carbon dioxide in that ball. You can see it in this bottom picture. They're balling this wasp. And what it does is it kills that wasp, but it doesn't kill all of those bees. Some of the bees will die, but the vast majority of them and the whole hive will survive from this. So it's kind of sacrificing, a couple dozen bees for the whole entire hive. Now, it was first found in 2019 in Vancouver. Then it moved, we found them in Washington State. In 2020, we found more of them. And then 2020, at the end of in the end of October, they found and eradicated a nest. They had these space suits, which I just think are really fun and lovely up here. You can see this picture to eradicate that nest. To date, 4 nests have been found and destroyed in Washington, and they have not had any detections this year. So there have been no detections of northern giant hornet in Washington or British Columbia so far. And we know that these are 2 different introductions. They are not from the same population. The one from BC are from Japan, and the one in Washington is from South Korea. That population is from South Korea. So we know that they were 2 different introductions, but hopefully give it a couple more years. If they detect 0, then they'll consider it eradicated, but they can't just after 1 year. And in Maine, we are surveying for this. We trap every year for invasive hornets and wasps, and we have not found it. We don't think it's here. So this is Asian giant hornet or northern giant hornet. This is the cicada killer. We get a lot of calls about them as possible Asian giant hornet sightings or northern giant hornet sightings. They look very different to me, but a big wasp is a big wasp, and so that's what we get most of our calls about. So, any questions from that last section, or just move along because we're over time already? Probably yes.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move along. Sorry, I always go over. I can't help myself. So
I don't think anybody minds.
Okay, good. So why you should appreciate wasps. Most are not aggressive, and most are ephemeral. So they're not lasting the whole season. They're only out for a couple weeks. Most of the solitary wasps can be important. Many of the solitary wasps are important pollinators. I mean, they're not primarily pollinators, but they do feed on nectar. And when they're visiting flowers, they have the potential to pollinate. And most are important predators of agricultural pests. So things like orthopterans and lepidopterans, so our katydids, crickets, grasshoppers, and then a lot of our butterfly pests, so things like cabbage loopers. A lot of those things are really great prey items for wasps, especially our social wasps, because they need a lot of food and they need a really concentrated source of it. So your home garden is a really concentrated source of all the cabbage loopers that they could eat, at least mine is. And they are important food sources for vertebrates, birds, skunks, bears, etc. They eat all those things. And there's a lot of things that are kind of threatening our wasps. We have pathogens and pests. So there are lots of different pests, parasites, predators, pathogens that are feeding on these things. We also have competition from invasive species. Remember our northern paper wasp and the European paper wasp. In a lot of areas, we don't even see northern paper wasp at all anymore, which is kind of sad. And it's been taken over by the European paper wasp. There was a researcher several years ago that came up he was doing some work with northern paper wasp, and he had to come all the way up to Maine to actually find populations, because where he was out of, it was very slim pickings for finding the northern paper wasp. They only had the European, or they had mostly the European. We have loss and fragmentation of habitat. So Maine, of course, is more forested than it ever has been historically. And with that comes challenges for wasp populations. Wasps tend to like open areas with lots of food sources. They nest in open, sunny ground nests. A lot of them are ground nesters, so they need that open, sunny, dry soil types. And so forested areas are not the best for finding prey for them, and also not the best for finding nesting sites. And so that's a problem. Climate change, of course, is a problem for wasps. We have more frequent extreme shifts in weather. We have storms that now regularly dump, 2 or 3 inches of rain in an hour period. And when we have rain like that, especially for our ground dwelling wasps, that's going to flood out those nests. We also see shifts in phenology where plants and other animals, potentially prey items, are emerging at different times than the wasps. And so if we don't have this kind of sync up, so when the prey is emerging, the predator emerges slightly afterwards, that's perfect. But if the prey is coming out, 2 or 3 weeks early, and then their life cycle is over, and then the predators emerging, and they don't sync up, that can devastate a population. And then, of course, pesticide exposure. We have, especially insecticides, they kill insects. So, of course, being exposed to them could cause problems. So one thing you can do is protect food and nesting sites, making sure you're growing things that have pithy twigs and stems. So places where wasps can lay their eggs, tunnel out and lay their eggs. Bee houses make really great solitary wasp houses. Usually they are nesting side by side. You can promote wasp-friendly flowers, not only for nectar and prey sources. So remember, the bee wolves, they need to find bees. And so if you have flowers, there are bees. And if there are bees, there are bee wolves. But also things like milkweed, Queen's Anne lace, things in the carrot family. For some reason, those seem to be very, very attractive to wasps. Leaving bare spots in your yard. You know how you've been trying to put grass seed on that sandy spot in the yard for the last 23 years. You don't need to do that anymore. It's actually wasp habitat. So it's perfect nesting sites for them. And then because they are animals, much to some people's surprise, they need water. So having a source of clean water is really important. Having maybe a muddy spot for some of those mud daubers, if you have maybe a bird bath with a little dripping leak in it or something, and a little mud patch underneath, that's really great for providing those mud sources for their nests. But clean water is also really important. And then the last question I always get is what to do if I'm getting stung. If you're getting stung, absolutely take care of your wasps. But you can reduce those problems first off by first collecting the queens in the spring. So if you're seeing yellow jackets, especially big yellow jackets, very early in the season, like early spring or middle spring, those are queens. And if you collect them, that is one nest that will not develop in your area. So collecting queens in the spring is a really great idea. Leaving up old nests or hang fake nests. I showed you some of the crocheted and knit ones earlier. Those are a really great way to deter wasps from kind of coming in the area or nesting in the area. Don't leave out leaky garbage. Again, some of these have olfactory learning or some learning ability. So if there's something that they get a reward from, they will recruit their friends, and they will also learn to focus on that scent later on. You clean up fruit drops in the late summer, fall, especially when there's going to be that switch where the larvae are no longer making sugary substances to feed those social wasps, the workers. Once that happens, your wasps will start focusing on other sources to find those carbohydrates. And so cleaning up fruit drops, things that are fermenting on the ground, can help. And making sure your hummingbird feeders don't leak, and add a wasp guard if they are. And then if you are getting stung, absolutely get rid of that nest. There's no reason to keep it. Do not change your life. Do not start going, through the back porch window so that you avoid getting stung. Just remove it. You can freeze it. So this guy up here in the top, I would not recommend doing it this way. He should be wearing some face protection here, but he's going to take this plastic bag, put it over this wasp nest, pull it down really quickly, close it, and then throw it in the freezer. So that's if you're super brave. If you're kind of a little less brave, the wasp hornet spray is a good one. You can usually get 20 feet away from it and spray it up into the wasp nest. Wear gloves, also wear long sleeves. This guy should be wearing the long sleeves. And then face protection so you don't get spray in your face. Or probably the safest solution is to hire a licensed applicator. Usually if it's an outside nest, something like this, they don't charge all that much depending on how far they have to come, but it's good to have it removed. But please, 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 word to the wise, do not use fire. There are reports every year of people burning down. This one here, this guy tried to plug up a wasp nest and burned, a bunch of stuff in California. Here, this guy used a Roman candle and shot it and then set his house on fire. And so don't use fire. It's a poor solution, and it doesn't work. It just makes them angry and burns down your house. So with that, I'll take questions, and hopefully everybody maybe learned something. We'll see.